And we're here in the governor's residence in the library. I'd just like to welcome you to the governor's first ever Facebook Live Town Hall. The governor has held more than 24 events in nearly a dozen communities across the state, and we figured there's no better way to cap this all off by having a Facebook Live Town Hall. So we're going to try to take a number of questions and get to as many as we can. For those duplicative questions, we're going to move on and try to get to as many as we can. But I think importantly to note that there's a lot of activity happening on crime and public safety, so I know the governor wanted to focus on those types of issues first. So those of you watching at home, please go ahead and submit your questions in the comments section. You can also message the governor's Facebook page and leave your question as well. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce the governor, who's going to offer a few remarks, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our questions. So, Governor.
Thanks, Matt, and good evening, fellow Alaskans. So we're getting down close to the end of the session. We have a number of huge issues that are still being worked on. The budget, some constitutional amendments, the permanent fund dividend is a big one, and of course crime. And as Matt said, what we'd like to do is take at least the first portion of this Facebook Live to talk about crime. So we introduced 4 crime bills that we believe would tighten up the crime situation, the public safety situation in the state of Alaska. We submitted those bills, 4 bills, in January, and we're getting towards the end here in terms of, once again, the session. And so right now the House is working on the 4 main concepts in those bills, which again would be sex offenses, classification and sentencing, pretrial, and probation and parole. And the House has been taking up an omnibus bill in which these concepts of our bills are included in. And we're feeling that things are going in the right direction. We'll know more tomorrow. If the bill is passed out with these crucial elements in there, we believe Alaska will be safer. And then it goes over to the Senate for the Senate to take a look at it, and hopefully we can get a crime package that'll make Alaskans safer this year. Then we're going to continually work on the public safety issues over the summer, fall with stakeholders, legislators as well. And what will be part of the focus this summer and fall will also be things like recidivism and re-entry, substance abuse, subversion programs, et cetera. But we are bound and determined to get these bills passed because we believe it's going to make a huge difference in the safety of all Alaskans.
Okay, well, with that said, we've asked Alaskans to submit some questions in advance leading up to this event as well. So as our questions begin to populate below in the comments section, again, if you're interested in participating, please go ahead and leave your questions there. But we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the questions that were submitted by Alaskans in advance. So on the issues of crime, we have a question from Jen Robin, who asked about how the public can get engaged on the crime bills to ensure they're passed. She says, so many are confused. I think it would help if you told people exactly what they should do.
Well, if you go to the legislative database, and you can go also to our website, we both the legislative database and our office has the crime bills laid out. And of course, many of these crime bills have been scrutinized by the press, so there's a number of press articles on the crime bills and what we're working at trying to fix. But you really want to call your legislators at this point. You really want to call your representatives and your senators, and you want to let them know that you'd like to get these bills passed. You want to see these bills passed sooner than later, because once again, they're going to strengthen protections for law-abiding Alaskans. And we're dealing with the criminal elements first within our public safety package, but we need to get these bills passed. So call, write, text, or otherwise contact your legislators and urge them to get these bills passed as soon as possible.
Sure. So we have a question from Jacqueline from Sterling, who talks about how she's a victim of crime and says that this criminal enterprise, after being a victim of theft in her vehicle, says this criminal enterprise creates a constant flow of vehicles and foot traffic 24/7 and very dangerous. When laws are changed, what provisions will be there to get places, to make places safer and to keep criminals behind bars?
Well, we're getting rid of the revolving door, the catch and release concept. And again, Jacqueline, I'm sorry for what's happened to you, because what's happened to you has happened to a lot of Alaskans. I don't think there's anyone that knows somebody that's not been touched by crime. And it's not getting any better, and it won't get any better on its own. But we're dealing with the catch and release issues. We want to make sure that if individuals move up to this state that were criminals in other state, that we understand through some of our assessments and pretrial assessments, when we look at those individuals, that we can take into account what they did in the other states as opposed to just being in Alaska with a blank slate and starting to criminalize here, or being criminals here in Alaska. So there's a number of things we're looking at. But again, these 4 bills that we talked about will actually help tremendously in strengthening up our public safety approach, and will keep people like yourself safer.
And Governor, we've received a number of questions regarding things like the Alaska State Troopers and the VPSO program. We received a number, so just the question is about obviously the budget contained items, and there's also recruitment retention. Do you have any thoughts and comments to share about public safety, troopers, VPSOs, et cetera?
So again, we made public safety job number 1 for our administration. And there's no more important role for a governor or a state government than to keep its people safe. And as a result, we are committed to beefing up our public safety, and that includes making sure that we can retain and recruit more troopers, work with other law enforcement agencies, take a look at our VPSO programs and see how we can strengthen our public safety approach and our protections in rural Alaska as well. We're committed to a comprehensive approach to public safety across the entire state, not just urban areas, but rural areas as well. And we're absolutely committed to turning this issue around so that the criminals are on the run, not law-abiding citizens. We have some of the worst statistics in the nation when it comes to violent crime, sexual assault, property crimes. Unfortunately, Alaska leads in so many of these categories. It is job number 1. But again, we're going to be working at retaining and recruiting troopers, making sure we have the right number of corrections officers, making sure that the courts have the resources to process these individuals that are committing crimes. And we're going to continue with this process. It won't end this year. It's going to continue in the next year as well, and probably the year after. But we're going to dedicate resources to make sure we protect you, law-abiding Alaskans.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and switch gears a little bit as some of these questions populate. I know that there's a lot of questions in there that are coming in, and we're going through those and keeping up on top. I know that there was some questions a lot about the PFD that we received, and I think that the question is one question we've received from James Snyder is, do you plan on putting the PFD in the Constitution, and what are your plans for that?
We have a constitutional amendment. We introduced that early on as well. And basically what that constitutional amendment says is that we're not going to make any changes to the permanent fund or permanent fund dividend program unless you, the people, are part of it. There have been many different discussions about what should be done with the permanent fund, what should be done with the PFD. And again, I'm adamant that there should be no changes unless you have a vote. You have a say in that. And so right now we are operating, our administration is operating under the decades-old laws that calculate the PFD as it has been for decades. And we are bound and determined to do everything we can to get Alaskans their full PFD as per law. Any changes in the future, you will be part of it. We do have a constitutional amendment that if the legislature acts on it and sends it out to you for a vote, and that's put into the Constitution, then there would be no changes unless you decided otherwise.
Okay. We have a question from Jennifer W., who asks, as a state senator, you voted for the same bloated budgets you talk about ending now as governor. What changed?
When I first came in, oil was at about $113, $115 a barrel. We had about $15 billion in the constitutional budget reserve. And the discussion at that point was that oil was actually going to go up in price. Some said it was going to go back to $140, $145 a barrel. Some of us didn't think it was going to do that, but when I was in the Senate, if you look at my record, when I was in committee and on the floor, I worked at trying to tip that curve downward in terms of spend. It got to a point where we were still spending too much money. In one of the budgets, the legislature put in the budget changes to the permanent fund as well, and at that point I said I couldn't be part of this anymore, and so I voted against the budget. I left the caucus. But it's a fair question. We thought that the price of oil was going to go up, and we also believe that we could shrink this budget at the same time. No doubt it was difficult, but we're bound and determined to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Okay. And along those lines, Governor, you're asked a similar question about things that were said along the campaign. There was a question from David F. that says, during the campaign, you said you didn't plan on making cuts to K-12, education, the university, the ferry system. Yet on February 13th, with the introduction of the budget, that happened. What changed? And the question is, were you dishonest with Alaskans?
Well, that's a fair question. And no, I don't believe I was dishonest with Alaskans, and I'll tell you why. In October of 2018, 1 month before the election, the price of oil was at $85 a barrel. If the price of oil stayed at $85 a barrel today, we would have $2 billion extra dollars in the general fund. That $2 billion extra dollars would have negated the need for those reductions that we had to put in the budget in in January, and when we rolled it out in February. By December, that price of oil had dropped into the low 50s, and there was discussions again that the price of oil would continue to fall. At that point, we had to make some difficult decisions as to how we were going to deal with this budget with a $1.6 to $2 billion deficit. And we made the painful decision, and we know it's painful for Alaska, to reduce the budget. But again, if the $85 barrel oil held, we could have made a step-down approach to the budget over a few years, reduced the budget in that manner, but the price didn't hold. We made a budget based upon oil that was at that time in the 50s, and so it was a difficult decision.
So we have a question about public safety. Someone asks, how do you plan on making public safety priority number one while cutting funding for public safety?
We're actually going to be putting more money in public safety, and we are committed to, over the next several years, to put resources in where we need to in public safety to once again retain and recruit troopers, make sure that we have the correct number of corrections officers and resources for corrections, as well as keep the courts open. And this summer, we'll be talking about things like substance abuse aversion programs, reentry programs. I've never made it a secret that we would be putting resources into public safety. We have to. It is job number one, and I'm on the record saying that more resources are probably going to be necessary.
Okay. You have a question, Governor, about a special session. They ask if the legislature doesn't do its job, will you be willing to plan to call a special session?
We're not going to. We're going to use all the tools that we have available to us by the Constitution to make sure that we get a balanced budget, that we get a budget that has a full PFD, that we get our crime bills passed that need to be passed. Those are huge issues that we feel are absolutely essential to end this session, and we still have time to do it. We'll determine when this session is over in the next several days whether we need to put some more time into some of these initiatives. But I'm going to hold off on saying that we're going to have a special session until we see what comes out of the legislative work over the next couple of days. But again, I'm not taking anything off the table.
Okay. We have a question from Jim S. that asks, Governor Walker proposed a final budget for FY 19 and 20 that called for a reduction in oil tax credits. Will you do the similar to cut oil tax credits in the coming years?
I know that others are having that discussion. We're currently focused again on a crime package, on making sure that we follow the decades-old calculation of the PFD so the Alaskans can get their full PFD. And we're focused on making the reductions where we need to make the reductions to get this number down in terms of the budget. The deficit is about $1.6 billion. We would have to tax every man, woman, and child in the state of Alaska, approximately $2,300, and every working Alaskan, if you figure 300,000 working Alaskans, $5,300 to close this gap. You're going to have to look at about a $1.6 billion tax hike on the oil companies or other industries, and that's just to close the gap. The issue is, unless we hem in our spending through the constitutional amendments that we're proposing, that increase in spend every year is about 4.5%. And so no matter what you do with the revenue, unless you arrest that rate of spend, we're going to be chasing new revenue constantly with escalating expenditures. So at this point, I don't have any plans of taxing Alaskans or industries. We first need to get these constitutional amendments in place, controls in place, and reduce the size of the budget.
Okay. We have a question from Maxie M, who asks, mentions that it's Teacher Appreciation Week, and what message do you have for teachers that maybe are paying attention to this budget and to what's going on here?
A very good question. I know that there are a number of educators that are concerned about the budget situation that we have here in Alaska, and I understand that. I was a teacher, principal, and superintendent. All my kids went to public schools. I went to public school. My wife went to public school. Teachers are probably some of the hardest working folks I've ever met. We all have favorite teachers. I think you go into teaching. One goes into teaching when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, because they want to help young people. They want to help young people with their futures. I can't think of a more caring group, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think during this week, everyone should take their hat off to teachers, and I think everyone remembers their favorite teachers. So I think it's a noble profession. We're having a difficult time this year with a budget and resources. I recognize that, and I understand that. But I think when you're talking to teachers or you're thinking about teachers, some of the hardest working, most caring people in the world, by far.
Thank you. We have a number of questions here coming in having to do with the Alaska Marine Highway System. I know that there's been a lot of conversation about that. Do you want to give some thoughts on that and what you see down the road? Yeah,
there's been talk about the administration shutting down the Marine Highway System. That's not going to happen. I know there was some information that went out that said October 10th the Marine Highway System will be shut down. As I mentioned, it's not going to happen. What we have done is we've sent out an RFP for a consultant to quickly help us understand, for example, what schedules and what routes we would continue in the current situation, based upon the number of folks taking those ferries between Alaskan cities and also down in Canada and down to Seattle. We're going to be taking a look at schedules, whether we continue to run, let's say, 5 runs per week from a certain port, or that we have to reduce that. These consultants are going to help us understand how do we make the ferry system more efficient, but continue to provide services for as many Alaskans as possible. So we're going to work through that this summer into the fall time, and we believe that we'll come up with a stronger ferry system, one that's going to be sustainable well into the future. The situation that we have now with our budget situation, our fiscal situation, is the ferry system, like some of our other systems, unless we become more efficient at what we do, it's going to be very difficult to sustain the current way we run the ferries. Okay,
thank you. We had a couple questions come in having to do with the red pens, and the comment was, I heard that this is being organized as part of some campaign. Have you actually been receiving red pens from Alaskans along the road?
I have. We've received several boxes of red pens from Alaskans, and of course, what the red pen signifies is that it's a symbol to encourage myself to veto where necessary. Again, the veto process, just like the special session process, is embedded in the Constitution. We don't take it lightly. But again, we're bound and determined to get our budget under control so that we can live within our means. I know there are some people, as mentioned in an earlier question, looking at the possibility of revenues in the future, and I'm sure those discussions are going to happen. But right now, we're focused on making sure that we can get this budget as tight as possible, get as many efficiencies as possible, and focus on core services that impact most Alaskans.
Okay. We're getting some questions having to do with marijuana. I know that there were a lot of questions throughout the session having to do with the Marijuana Control Board, et cetera. Do you want to share some thoughts on that, Governor?
Sure. Marijuana is law, and it was put into law by the people of Alaska. And I respect the law. I respect all of our laws, and so I will implement that law. The Marijuana Control Board is a board made up of individuals, some associated with the industry, some associated with the public. And we believe that the board should be balanced, should have a number of different perspectives on the board. I think it'll make it a stronger board. But it's not our goal to kill the industry or thwart the industry's growth. We do believe there needs to be discussions on the board and regulations as to how to make sure that this industry grows in a manner that is safe for Alaskans and works for the industry. And we're determined to do that.
Okay, we have a question from Angie down on the peninsula having to do with kind of shifting costs of the state onto local municipalities and communities. And I wasn't able to get through all the questions, but I know that you have some thoughts on that.
Sure, that's a question that's come up. Is is that our goal? Is to shift things down to the local community? Our goal is to get the budget at the state level reduced to a manner that we can sustain it, that we can afford it, and we understand that all Alaskans, cross sectors, the state, municipalities, doesn't matter where you live, will be impacted by the lack of revenue and the expenditures that the state is dealing with. And so there may be some municipalities that want to take on some aspects of services that we are no longer going to be able to fund at the level that we are funding. There's been discussions about school debt service, more money for education, for example. And these are discussions that also have to happen at the local level, not just the municipalities, but school districts, as to what level of service do they want to maintain, and do they want to pay for it through fees or taxes. That's a decision that's got to be made at the local level. And we understand that those discussions are happening. We understand that the budget, the approach of the budget that we've put forth is causing some of those discussions, but that's not the main goal. The main goal is to get the budget at the state level under control.
We had a question from Danica S. that says, Dear Governor, how do we improve our education system? Aside from getting common sense laws in place, her top concern is the future of Alaska. Our children's future need to be fully funded as they possibly could be.
Again, I was a teacher. I went to public school, so don't my kids. So I know the importance of a good education. Our system is not doing as well as some other state systems. We have individual schools that are doing very well. We have individual school districts that are doing very well. But we have some schools and we have some school districts that are really, really struggling. And struggling in terms of their reading outcomes for kids coming out of 3rd grade, or their algebra proficiency in algebra coming out of 8th grade. And we know that, and a lot of educators know that. And so one of the things that we are working on is that this spring, summer, and fall, we're going to be working on a number of educational initiatives with as many stakeholder groups as possible to see how we can improve those outcomes, how we can manage things more efficiently, how we can potentially take some burdensome regulations off of school districts and out of the classroom, and how we can focus more of our resources and more money into the classroom as possible to help increase these outcomes that we need. But we certainly need to have the discussions with all the stakeholders, including parents, students, teachers, administrators, board members. And it's our intent to make this coming year an education year for the state of Alaska.
So we have a question from Greg Knight, who asks about public media and funding for public media. Do you have any comments on that?
I believe the state of Alaska funds public media in the neighborhood of 7%, I think, of its budget. Again, this is an issue that, an item that we put in our budget to be reduced, because we've got to make decisions as to what our priorities are with a limited amount of money that we have in terms of our revenue. And so right now we are slated not to put that 7% in, not to fund public radio, public TV from the state's perspective. The public radio and public TV, they also get private contributions, and there's other methods by which they can raise funding. Right now, for the state of Alaska, we want to focus on, for example, increasing our number of state troopers, making sure that our roads are maintained, making sure that we have money for education. So we're getting down to bare bones in the state of Alaska, and we're going to be focusing on funding those systems that impact most Alaskans. We're not saying that public radio or public TV is not a good thing. We're just saying at this time, we may not have the funds to fund it.
Oh, you got a funny one from Jeff Lanfield that we'll get back to here. So we got a couple more questions coming in. We have one from Carol Frazier that asks why it's so difficult to repeal SB 91, Governor.
So it's a massive bill. I think it was a bill that a lot of folks didn't know all the intricacies and what the ramifications were going to be. I personally believe that the bill needs to be repealed. That's what we're working towards in the bills that we've put forth. It's probably going to take a little bit of time this spring, and probably have to go through another round next year to fully repeal those elements in SB 91 that increased the criminality, increased the crimes in the state of Alaska. Because you have some folks, some legislators that believe that we need to be focused on things like rehabilitation and recidivism and re-entry for some of these folks that are criminals. It's a diverse state. People have a lot of different ideas on crime. But I do think that most Alaskans now and most legislators understand that our crime rates and the criminal activity has grown so much over the last several years. Anchorage is on pace to break its record for murders. That's appalling. Alaska has some of the highest property crime rates in the country. We have some of the worst sexual assault statistics in the country. So I think most legislators right now believe that we have got to tighten these laws up to protect Alaskans. And I'm hopeful that over the next couple of days, starting with the House and then the Senate, that this will take place, that we will be able to repeal some of the more egregious aspects of 91 and hopefully get that bill repealed in its entirety very soon.
Okay, we got a question from Jackson Blackwell who asks how we're encouraging, what steps are you taking to encourage young people to return to the state?
It's a good question. We have to get our crime rates under control. We have to improve our educational outcomes. We've got to get this fiscal issue under control. And that's why we're working as quickly as we can. That's why we've made some of the decisions that we have, because we're running out of time. Again, some of our statistics are not encouraging for people to stay here or to return. But I'm really optimistic when it comes to Alaska. I believe we have tremendous opportunities in the state of Alaska. We get this fiscal issue under control, we get our crime rates under control, we start working on improving our educational outcomes for all students across the state. I think this is going to be a place that is going to be a terrific place for folks to live. It's a beautiful state. We have a lot of resources. We just have a couple things that we've got to fix, fundamental things that we have to fix. And once we do that, I think we'll get people returning to the state. And also, we have a team that's going out and recruiting businesses to come to the state of Alaska. We believe that our location, where we are on the globe, our access to the Pacific Ocean, our cargo hub coming out of Ted Stevens International Airport, and our natural resources all bode well for investment in the state of Alaska. And so we are in the process now of having discussions with various industries, various businesses, to see what it would take for them to come to Alaska and to just let them know what Alaska is all about and what we have to offer. So we're optimistic that we can begin to diversify our economy and get more workers to the state of Alaska and provide more jobs for Alaskans to come back home.
Well, Governor, we have a question from Matt Welk who asks, Governor, when was the last time you drove the Tok cutoff from Glen Allen? Is there a plan and funding to make the road less hazardous?
That was quite the ride. It's a road that's absolutely in need of repair, and they are repairing it. We just drove it just about 2 weeks ago. And we had part of a presentation up in Tok. We went to Glen Allen, and there are certainly some pretty bad sections of the road. They've worked on some sections and have improved the road in some of those sections dramatically. But that is certainly a road. We've got a number of roads in a similar situation that, again, we are trying to repair, and we will have a capital budget this year that will hopefully access a significant amount of federal money to work on our road projects, but we are working on it, Matt.
So, Governor, you've been asked this question a couple times, but it has to do with kind of the either or. But it's if you're, would you rather have an income tax, a half PFD, a sales tax, if your budget doesn't work out?
I'd rather have no tax, and I'd rather have a budget in which the expenditures and revenues meet. And I know that discussion is already in process, and I know that it will continue, and I'm going to be interested in hearing what people have to say. People talk about a sales tax. Current calculations are to close that $1.6 billion gap, you would need a sales tax in the neighborhood of 12 to 16%. If it came to an income tax and you had 300,000 workers in the state of Alaska as a number to calculate by, you'd be looking at $5,300 per worker on average to close that gap. And the problem is, again, and this is why we've offered the constitutional amendments to hem our spending in, because without those constitutional amendments, the increase in the budget is about 4.5% a year. So even though you may think you close it with a tax or taking the PFD, in the end, that budget gap continues to grow at a rate of about 4.5% per year. So if we can get, through our constitutional amendments, if we can get that rate of spend down to 2.5% a year, we can get more investment in the state of Alaska and reduce the size of the budget. We probably will have enough revenue at the rate of production that we have right now with the price that we have now in oil, as well as a draw on the earnings reserve to help pay for this government.
Okay. So just an update, we're about halfway through, over 30 minutes. We have more than 300 viewers right now live. To the media that are watching, we're going to have a 4K video that we can share with you afterwards that you guys can use. I encourage you to continue asking questions to the folks, and we're going to get to a few more. I know that there was a question having to do with income tax, particularly why not an income tax that is collected by those working in state but are from out of state that don't pay into our state?
Because again, a tax is going to take, we have to take money from somewhere to close this gap. I agree with that, there's no doubt. The question is, do you take that money from government services and reduce the size of government? Or do you take that money from Alaskans in the form of an income tax or a sales tax or property tax and shrink their income? Right now, our focus is on really scrutinizing the budget, seeing how we can make it more efficient and reduce expenditures where they are not core service areas. And even that, we still have to reduce in some of our core service areas. Rather take a look at doing that first. And once we get through that process, I'm sure the conversation of revenues will come up. But right now, we're focused on shrinking the size of government, not shrinking the size of Alaskans' wallets.
Okay, so we have a couple other questions coming in right now. Governor, what will you do as governor about, well, this is a question from Anchorage about homelessness in Anchorage. It's really gotten worse. It seems like nothing is happening to help. I really think it has a lot to do with crime. And this is a question from Mark Hernandez.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And homelessness seems to be a growing problem around the country, and it is growing in Alaska. We believe that a drug addiction as well as some psychological and mental health issues are impacting the homeless population. This is a discussion I know that many are having. We will work with those folks at the local level. Right now, this is a municipality issue. We know there's homeless folks, whether it's in Anchorage or Fairbanks or in the Mat-Su. And we really need to take a look at what are the root causes of homelessness. I know, for example, that Seattle puts a lot of money into the homeless situation, upwards of $1 billion in terms of the collective spend from nonprofits and the city of Seattle, et cetera. But their homeless population continues to grow. So we have to really take a look at what the root causes are and then work together to come up with a plan to address those root causes.
Okay, yeah, we had a question come in about out-of-state licensing, reciprocity for folks that are trained perhaps and that are coming to Alaska. Is there any thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, we're working on a bill that would streamline that and make that easier, so that if you're a professional and you have a license from another state, that it would make it easier for you to come to Alaska and get licensed pretty quick. And that way you can get to work and become a productive resident of Alaska. So that is something we're looking at, that is something we're working on, and we plan on streamlining that process.
Okay, so one question we have has to do with economic development, and also a question on why not focus more on renewable energy, and that's from Joseph S.
Yeah, energy costs are going to be crucial for the future of Alaska to be able to diversify. No doubt about it. Healthcare costs are too. The question is, it's a vast state, and we know that in some areas of the state of Alaska we have renewables such as hydro. Some of our communities have wind. There were attempts at geothermal. We also have large amounts of gas on the North Slope, and it's that gas that we're going to try and not only monetize potentially through selling it through a gas line, but also using that gas to generate electricity for folks on the rail belt. We're looking into different methods to harness that energy. Direct current concept, we're studying that. Again, there's hydro possibilities, but right now we're going to do everything we can to drive down the cost of energy in the rail belt areas, but also in rural Alaska. And so renewables are not off the table. It's just that when we have gas and we have hydro possibilities and even coal, which I know some folks are against coal, these are energy sources that can reduce the cost of energy considerably for Alaskans. And so we're looking at all of this right now.
Okay. We have a question from Jacqueline that writes, what's the deal with the PFD and the back pay?
So we've introduced a bill to make sure that we have a full PFD and that we have a bill that also calls for the back pay. You've got some legislators that don't believe what we believe. You've got some legislators that want to, some want to short the PFD, and there may be some that want to eliminate the PFD. Some legislators want that money for government and government programs. We believe that through the 50-50 concept that currently exists in statute, and through SB 26, for example, that we can pay a full PFD, and there is still money for government as well. So we believe it's a partnership between the people of Alaska and the state. There are just some legislators that feel that the PFD is, if something's got to go, it's going to be the PFD. And they'll use that money for government. We believe that we shrink the size, we believe, this administration, shrink the size of government and keep as much money in the pocket of individuals. And that's why we do have a full PFD request out, as well as back pay for bills for the back pay.
Okay. Governor, we know that you've worked well with the federal government and the president. We have a question from Sam Moore that says, what are you doing to work with the federal government on our budget issues and in addition, issues having to do with public land access?
So we just had a meeting today with our representative here in the state of Alaska for BLM. It was a pretty productive meeting because we're looking at doing a number of things up by ANWR in terms of land and boundaries, as well as land that we're hoping to receive as part of our Statehood Act from the federal government. We are looking at some corridor issues so that we can access resources as well. So we are constantly working with the federal government. As I mentioned, we had a meeting today. We were also on the phone today with Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue, talking about some economic opportunities with a potential timber industry. So we're in constant contact with our federal delegation, as well as representatives of the Trump administration. But we are hopeful that we're going to get some movement on some of these boundary issues and some of these land issues. And I think in a few weeks we may have some pretty important news to share with Alaskans.
Okay. Governor, kind of the feed keeps moving here, and there's a lot of questions. Everyone's very curious about veto power down the road, et cetera. I know that we addressed it kind of at the top of this, but maybe for those who have recently joined us, some of those questions are continue to come in.
Yeah, so let me just give a little, a little history. The framers of our Constitution, the state of Alaska, when they put together the Constitution, they put certain tools in there for the executive. And those tools actually make the executive in Alaska one of the most powerful in the country by virtue of the Constitution. And one of the tools is the veto, the power of the veto. And how it works with a budget is this. The governor proposes a budget. First proposal comes out on December 15th of every year. And then by February 13th, mid-February, the governor can amend that budget. The legislature then takes a look at the budget. And that's exactly what we did. We proposed the budget. The legislature is taking a look at the budget. Starts in the House works the budget, goes over to the Senate works the budget. And if they have two different budgets, then they come together, which is going to happen here shortly. A conference committee was just named where they try and work out their differences in that budget. Then they send the executive the budget. I take a look at the budget. And if I believe that we don't have the revenues to support certain items in the budget, or we believe that there is spending that in times where we had more revenue may have been frivolous, the governor has the constitutional right to line item veto. That is a very powerful tool. It's not something to be taken lightly. People have asked me if the veto, my decision to veto is off the table, or is it something that's absolutely going to be used. The best answer I can say is we're waiting for the budget to come back to us from the legislature here. It should happen in a couple days. We'll take a look at that budget. But again, if there are items in that budget that we can't sustain, or if the budget is too big for our revenues to sustain, I will be looking at using the veto pen to make sure that we get that budget down. And again, this power was put into the Constitution by the framers of our Constitution because they did contemplate times like this where we might have to reduce the size of the budget that comes over from the legislature. Now, with that said, if the legislature doesn't agree with the vetoes, they can call themselves back in, or they can try and override the vetoes that a governor would put through a supermajority. So in the end, the legislature has the final say, but I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself. We've got to take a look at the budget, and then we're going to make a decision as to whether that's a budget Alaska can afford going forward.
Okay. Governor, you have some questions regarding the University of Alaska system, particularly funding for the University of Alaska system. If you could address that.
So the University of Alaska system, we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter if it's the Marine Highway system, K-12 education, our transportation systems. The University of Alaska, I'm a graduate of the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I have two kids that are going to the University of Alaska, attending the University of Alaska. I think it's a fine university. The question is, can we afford to fund the university at the rates we've been funding the university? Can the university become leaner and meaner? Can it become the best university in the Northern Hemisphere, let's say, in areas like math and sciences? I believe it can. The funding situation, the revenue situation that we have right now may preclude the university from having hundreds of different degree programs, trying to be all things to all people. We're all going through this process in the state of Alaska right now with the revenue picture and the expenditures. How do we get our expenditures and our revenues to meet? And the university system, again, is in the same boat that some of these other systems are. We've had conversations with university officials regarding the budget, and we believe that this is an opportunity for the university to look inside as to what they want to be, who they are now, and what they want to be, and where they want to go. We'll assist them with that, but again, these are difficult times when it comes to the budget. These are difficult times when it comes to revenue, and everyone's going to be impacted. All these systems are going to be impacted, including the university.
Well, and Governor, kind of transitioning to K-12 education, I know that there's some questions having to do with the House and Senate budget, particularly containing funding for legislation. Do you want to discuss that briefly? I know that we've received a couple of questions.
With regard to K-12 funding?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we've had discussions with the legislature here. We've had discussions almost on a daily basis with regard to funding. As it regards to K-12, what we have said to legislative leaders here recently is make sure that you fund education, make sure that it's in the budget, because there's questions right now as to whether there's funding in the budget, and we're having those discussions. This year, we won't look at reducing the size of the education budget this year, if they put the funding in it, so that we can have the conversation over the summer into the fall. Again, make this coming year, an education reform year, where we all work together to see how we can change things to get the outcomes that we all know we should have for all kids, regardless of what school or school district or part of the state that they're in. So, although we had initially proposed reductions in education, what we have said to legislative leadership is that we put the funding in, make sure that there's funding in the budget, and we will not veto that funding in any form or fashion. We will let that funding go through, again, so we can have that conversation going into next year on what reforms we want to look at for education. Okay,
thank you for that. Governor, we have some questions having to do with the budget again, having to do with line item veto, but also what you plan down the road. You just addressed education, but other issues having to pertain to education, particularly a reform package that you talked about.
Yeah, we're working on that. We're working at ways to reduce costs for school districts. Several years ago, I had introduced a bill that would have allowed school districts to voluntarily become part of the state insurance pool, for example. There were studies then that showed that we could have saved millions upon millions of dollars in doing that. That money could have then potentially been used by school districts to go into the classroom as opposed to insurance. We are looking at different options for school districts, for example, and students, to strengthen our public homeschool approach, to strengthen our cyber school, cyber delivery, online delivery approach, partner with the university. K-12, especially the high schools, partnering with the university so that we can have more middle college concepts where students could go to a campus or a setting in which they can get both their high school degree and their associate's degree through the University of Alaska, which would save money not just for parents but for the system as well. So we're looking at a number of different approaches to reduce costs but to get better outcomes as well. And we're not going to leave anything off the table. I think we have to get really creative and think outside of the box. Because if we're gonna get different results, we have to look at different approaches. So again, K-12 education is going to be a topic of conversation this summer, fall, and going into next legislative session. And I am very optimistic. I'm very hopeful that we can get some reforms that will help get better outcomes for our kids.
Okay, so we've passed 45 minutes in. We've had over 700 comments on the stream, more than 300 viewers, and we've had a large number of folks submit questions. So we're going to try to get to a few more here as we wrap up. But Governor, I think it's if you could give, I know a lot of people in the media read some stories having to do with crime bills moving its way through the legislature. Over the weekend, the House amended HB 49, which contains major elements of your bill and was something that was negotiated and dealt with. Do you mind going over that, particularly how critical we are in this process? Anything that Alaskans can understand about what's going on with crime-related legislation? Again,
we had 4 crime bills. We believe that those 4 crime bills significantly roll back what was called SB 91. These are 4 crime bills that would make Alaskans safer, once again, by reclassifying certain crimes, making sure that crimes related to sex, sexual assault, are classified and the sentencing is stiffer. Looking at probation, looking at probation and parole and pretrial issues. And so these 4 elements we believe are crucial to making Alaska safer. You've heard about the catch and release concepts. You've heard about individuals potentially being arrested one moment and then back out on the street the next moment to commit more crimes. We believe that if the House moves these bills, which are now contained in SB 49, these concepts that are contained in SB 49, as we have them now, it will make Alaska safer. So again, we're urging you, Alaskans, to contact your legislators. The bill is in the House now. If we can move it to the Senate intact, we are confident that the Senate will keep these strong provisions inside the bill and pass that bill out. And again, this is just the beginning. We've got a lot of work to do to make Alaska safer. We have a lot of work to do to reduce our property crime rates, sexual assault rates, our assaults on individuals. I believe we can do it. New York City went through a period of time like this. Decades ago, in which it was a pretty lawless city. I mean, some of you have probably seen old movies about New York City. The murder rates were high, the assault rates were high, drug dealing and openly in the streets of New York. New York City is now one of the safest cities in the world. Its property crime rate, its assault rates, its sexual assault rates, its murder rates are all vastly lower, for example, than our largest city in the state of Alaska. And so for those folks that think it may not or cannot be done, it can be done. We just have to focus on it. We have to make it job number 1. We have to stop tolerating certain behaviors. And we've got to put the law-abiding people of Alaska first. And that's what these 4 components, these 4 bills that we introduced do. So that's why I urge all of you to contact the House and contact the Senate and say, please get this bill out, SB 49 or HB 49, with these elements intact in it. It will make us a much safer state. Okay.
And again, there's been I think a lot of focus on the permanent fund dividend. Ronnie Morocco asks, if the PFD continues to get tapped into for budget, where's the incentive to stop spending?
I agree. I don't think there is. And that's, if you look at the history of spending in the state of Alaska, going back decades and decades and decades, whenever Alaska comes into more money, a different revenue stream, we don't act like a lot of households and save it. We don't act like a lot of households and hang on to it. There was a time where we got a lot of oil money, and there was a period of time where we saved some of that, but we've spent that down now. The past 4 years, we've spent $14 billion out of our savings. That's gone. That's a lost opportunity. And now what we have is a structural deficit that is persistent. I personally believe if we tap into the PFD, you got to remember, just a few short years ago, we wouldn't touch the permanent fund at all. And then we tapped into it, and not only are using 50% of the earnings, which a lot of people agree with, but some legislators now want to use your PFD to pay for government. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's necessary, and it's certainly not going to help reduce spending. It's going to increase spending because, again, when politicians come into money, it's spent. So I think the people of Alaska could spend their PFD a lot better than politicians. I think we just control the size of this budget, reduce it, contain it. We will get more investment in the state of Alaska. We have tremendous opportunities in the state of Alaska. I don't think we need to take the PFD, and I'm working overtime to get full PFD passed and to follow the laws that have been on the books for decades.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alaskans, for tuning in. As we said, we had a lot of engagement, a lot of comments and questions, and a lot of viewers that had us following us live here on Facebook Live for our first Facebook Live Town Hall. We want to thank you so much. We look forward to doing something like this again. I'd like to hand it over to the governor for one final word before we go ahead and wrap up for the evening.
Session is winding down. We have a budget we're dealing with. We have a permanent fund issue that we just talked about, and crime issues. Please call your legislators. Now, tell them what you think on the permanent fund. Tell them what you think on crime and protecting you law-abiding Alaskans. Tell them what you think on the budget. We're going to get through. We're going to have a budget this year. I hope we have a crime package that gets through. And I am committed to making sure that the laws are followed when it comes to the PFD. We need your help. Call your legislators, text your legislators, email your legislators, and tell them how you feel on these issues. And I want to thank you for taking the time today to be part of this online town hall. Have a great night.
Hey, thank you.